벤틀리? 아닌가?
Basically follow that car.
Ah, yeah.
It'll go down to the left, yeah, where he's going. It'll wind down to the car park, and then the distillery is ahead of you on the right.
All right. Thank you.
Enjoy your visit.
Thank you.
Thanks.
맥켈란.
저 차 왔나 봐.
헐.
벤틀리 좋아하시네.
좋겠다 아저씨.
물어볼까 그러면?
No.
맥켈란 들어왔습니다. 와. 와우, 건물가 엄청나다.
핸드폰도?
Yep. 저것도 벤틀리 같은데?
와.
여기 사람들 다. 오. 오, 노래.
아 싫어.
카메라가 나오는데? 와우. 자동이네.
Good morning.
Hi,
welcome
morning.
to Macallan.
Yeah. Can I film the video?
Yeah, absolutely. No
Oh,
worries.
thank you.
Yes.
NOH. Yeah, perfect. And your email?
Oh, can I type? It's quite here.
Sometimes it's easier.
Confusing, yeah.
Is this your first time visiting us? Yeah.
Yes, right.
Fantastic. My name's Adam. I'm going to be your host through the experience
Wow.
today. So what we'll do is around 10 o'clock, so about 10 minutes time. Are you driving today?
Yeah, only for me.
You drive. Yeah. So what we can do is you can take part in the nosing part of the experience, and then we have bottles you can take away your drams with you,
Nice,
so
yeah.
you can sort of have the extended experience when you get home later on.
와. 일부러 이 마크를 보이게 이렇게 주시네.
그러네. 세팅도 딱.
앞으로 이거 보게끔.
맥켈란. 불러보겠지? 2시간짜리인데?
우와.
Thank you. 라즈베리. 클러티드 크림? 뻑뻑하는 거 너무 귀엽다. 다들 여기저기서 뻑뻑하고 있어.
잘 올라갔어.
맛있다.
스콘이야.
맛있다. 근데 엄청 부드러워.
Go away and be like, oh, I need to have some Macallan.
Yeah.
So at home, do you?
And we started to drink whiskey recently, so
Okay.
yeah, we are learning about
Yes,
whiskey.
you're learning more and more.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah.
That's lovely to hear, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit more today about us here at Macallan and our heritage, and go away with some more knowledge about our whiskies as well.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I'll even enjoy your.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So what better place to begin our journey around the distillery than surrounded by bottles of the Macallan. So our outer wall has 840 bottles in it.
이게 다 와, 이게 다 뭐야? 미쳤다.
And the inner wall here is around 400. Now I'm not sure of the exact number because our archiving team keep taking bottles in and out to do additional research on them. So that's why you'll see some gaps here, particularly in these oldest bottles, as they're trying to discover more about the history of where that bottle went after it left the Macallan initially and then came back to us. What happened in that between times when we didn't have the bottle. So they're just doing a little bit of extra research on these ones. So does the year 1824 ring a bell to everybody? I'm looking at a lot of blank faces, so I'm going to say no, but it should, because it's on every single one of our bottles. It's the year that the Macallan Distillery was first established. Now, on the estate though, we can actually take our history back even further. If we go all the way back to the 1400s, there's evidence of distillation of alcohol taking place on this land. Now, at this time, that would have been illegal. It's what's called illicit distillation. And so you had to hide everything from the government. All the king's men would be wanting their cut, the tax man. What we would do is hide everything, essentially. Now, the Spey Valley here has so many distilleries in it because we were uniquely designed to do this. There was only one road in the 1400s going in and out of this valley, and so you could see all the king's men coming up the road, so you knew to hide everything in advance of their arrival. On top of that, we have a fantastic community spirit here, which lasts to this day. And so we'd all be looking out for one another. The runners would go from one village to the next to let them know the movements of those king's men as well. Now, if we jump ahead in time a little bit to the year 1700, the estate here of Easter Elchies was gifted to a gentleman named Captain John Grant. Now, he was actually from Forres, which is a town just about 30 minutes drive up towards the coast. And he was gifted this land for his parts in the first of the Jacobite rebellions. The fact he was gifted the land tells you a little bit about which side he was on. It wasn't the Jacobites. So he wasn't really the most popular guy locally. A lot of the locals really didn't like him at all. However, he was gifted this land by the king. And so he decided to build himself a holiday home here. And that's that large white building we've all passed on our way up to the Distillery Building today. And this is Easter Elchies' house, the spiritual home of the Macallan. And so Captain Grant would use this as a base to come and have holidays, do all those leisurely activities you might expect an estate owner to take part in. A bit of hunting, a bit of fishing. But he certainly didn't want to be a farmer. It's a lot of hard labor, and he was retired. And so what he actually did was leased out the land to locals who would work the land. So he gets a nice, beautiful estate to come and visit, and he gets a bit of extra money in his pocket. Certainly a win-win for Captain Grant. And this practice of leasing out the farmland continued through subsequent owners of the estate. And in the year 1824, that special year for us, was when one of these tenant farmers, called Alexander Reed, purchased the first license to distill legally. So until this point, any distillation of alcohol on the estate was illegal. But in 1824, Alexander Reed purchased the license so he could do it with the backing of the law. Now, he was quite uniquely positioned to do this because he was not only a farmer, but also a local school teacher. So he had a little bit more money than most people would have. Your average farmer would never have been able to afford that distillation license. Alexander Reed was a pioneer of advanced farming techniques as well. So he knew how to grow the best quality crops, which certainly helped in his production of spirits. After the passing of Alexander Reed, the distillery changed hands a couple of different times, until in the year 1892 it landed with a gentleman named Roderick Kemp. Now, Roderick Kemp was quite an esteemed wine merchant. He'd built his trade from Inverness, the capital of Highlands, starting as a shop assistant there. And he just learned more and more about the wine industry and the sourcing of how they aged their product, and built up a lot of unique contacts in that industry as well throughout Europe. And so in 1892 he introduced the sherry seasoned casks for which we're famed at the Macallan. But before he came here, he actually co-owned Talisker Distillery on Skye. Has anyone had Talisker whiskey before? Yeah, so you'll know it's quite a bit different to the Macallan, and that's key because Roderick Kemp and his business partners were always fighting. Couldn't agree as to what made the best way to make whiskey, and so it was in 1892 that Roderick Kemp sold up and came over here when he bought the Macallan and did things his own way. So we regard him to be the father of modern Macallan because it's then that we started filling those sherry seasoned casks. Now if we look at this oldest section of the wall here, we have bottles dating all the way back. Our oldest one in the wall is this large one here from 1848. You'll notice that there's no distinctive shape or size to the bottles. This is probably the first instance of recycling taking place on the estate. Wasn't for any environmental reason, it's purely money-based. If you could reuse a bottle, it was a lot cheaper than having one made. Glass making was incredibly expensive back in the 1800s. And so if you could reuse those bottles, then absolutely that would work. So you'll notice we've got some more classically rum bullion shaped bottles, but even some medicine shaped bottles. So this could tell us what perhaps housed the bottle contained before we filled it with Macallan whiskey. Now if we head a little bit further down the wall to this center pillar here, you see one of our oldest expressions of the Macallan. Now in the year 2018 we opened our brand new distillery facility here, and as part of that we had a celebration release, the Genesis decanter, the Macallan in Lalique. So this decanter was crafted for us by the French crystal makers Lalique, very much to represent the distillery building, with the humps on the side of the building to represent the rolling undulations of the roof. In addition, if you have a close look at the stopper, it has the same waffle patterning as the ceiling does. Very much an embodiment of the distillery building. The whiskey inside's a little bit older though, aged 72 years. So at the time, in 2018, this was the oldest expression of the Macallan. I have a couple which are a wee bit older since now, but at the time this was the oldest. So I've mentioned three key gentlemen in the history of the Macallan. We have Captain John Grant, who established the estate of Elchies here. We have Alexander Reid, who purchased that first license to distill in 1824, and Roderick Kent, who introduced the sherry seasoned cask and is the father of the modern Macallan. Now there is a fourth gentleman who I think is incredibly important as well. His name is Alan Sheik, who's actually a Hollywood writer and producer. Has anyone seen the Netflix series The Queen's Gambit? Yeah? So this was actually something that Alan Sheik co-wrote and produced. So very much at the forefront of Hollywood to this very day. But back in the 70s, he was out there in the States, whilst his brother Peter ran the distillery here. And unfortunately Peter passed away, and so Alan came back over here to run the family business. So the Sheik family were the last family to own the distillery prior to its purchase in 1996, and then subsequently the Edrington Group, who's our current owners today. So the Sheiks are actually directly descended from Roderick Kent. So all the way from 1892 to 1996, one family has run this place. They're incredibly important to us, but Alan especially so. Because Alan took his knowledge of what people wanted. I mean, he was a writer, has to know what people want, and marketing. And so he took that knowledge and passion and he introduced that to the Macallan marketing team. One key part of this was when he created a mock-up of number 1 in Dallas. So I'm sure we've all heard of the big city in America, Dallas, Texas. Now we've got our own Dallas here in Mercer, but it's incredibly small. And it's pretty much just one street. It looks like this to this very day, probably with the chickens going across the road still. It's a very small village, and but Alan decided to create this mock-up, and as a little bit of a link between the States and here, and it kind of snowballed from there for the Macallan to grow to be the globally renowned brand it is today. We have featured in many different advertising mediums in the past. We had one of our first adverts though was in the Times newspaper. We had a poem right here next to the crossword. It's in Old Scots. I'm not going to try reading it because I will make a fool of myself. But this was essentially to tell you to have a drama, to savour a drama of Macallan whilst you were completing the crossword. Now this was strategically chosen as the location because we know that the crossword is the page of the paper that people spend the longest period of time on, especially if it's a hard one. One of my favourite pieces that we have though is in the mid-90s. The Macallan's curiously small stills had reached such fame that they were actually featured on the back of the Scottish £10 note. This is a world first. No distillery had featured on any currency anywhere in the world at this point. So we're very proud to be part of that history. And they do say that every distillery worker here in the 90s when this note was printed received a £10 note and a bottle of the Macallan as a Christmas gift that year. They all deny it though. I think they're trying to get us to give it to them again, but they've certainly had it once, they're not getting it twice, alright? If we head a little bit further down still, we have one of our largest bottles of the Macallan. This is our 6-litre imperial decanter of the Macallan M. There were just 4 of these crafted from Lalique crystal, and one sold at auction in Hong Kong for $628,000 US. So around about £500,000. Now, we're very happy that it made such a large sum of money, because this was actually a charity auction. And the principal shareholder of the Edrington group that owns the Macallan is the Robertson Trust. So the Robertson Trust is a Scottish charity that not only distribute their funds here in Scotland, but throughout the world. So every year, millions of pounds of Edrington's profits go directly to charity. So you know, if you're having a dram of the Macallan or Glenrothes, Highland Park, any other Edrington brand, you're helping out charity. So if you need to do a charitable act of having a dram every now and again, just do so responsibly, yeah. This bottle was also crafted in the standard 70 centilitre decanters as well, so a little bit easier to pour. I wouldn't want to be the person trying to pour this one. Us Scots are well known for our hatred of spilling any alcohol, and so we would certainly have a tear coming to our eyes if we tried pouring this, and I can guarantee some spillage. So from one of the largest bottles to some of the oldest, now along the bottom of the wall here, we have the Macallan Fine and Rare collection. This is the largest collection of vintage whiskies in the world. It's quite uniquely labelled. On the large font in the front, we'll have the year of the spirit being distilled and the cask being filled. And the smaller label along the neck of the bottle will tell you the age of the whiskey at the time of bottling. So you might be able to find your year in here somewhere, and don't worry, I'm not going to ask anyone which year is theirs. But you'll notice that there is some gaps, however. Particularly in the early 1940s, we have a section there during the Second World War where production was completely halted. So we will never ever have a fine and rare release from those years, because we simply do not have casks from those years to have a release. There's also some gaps in the later years, and this could simply be that the casks are still in the warehouse. They're not ready yet, they're still maturing. Because all of these are single cask releases, they need to stand out on their own, and sometimes that takes a very long time. Sometimes it doesn't take so long though. There is no standard age restriction on the fine and rare release. So you'll have some in here which are as young as 15 years old, and some as old as 60. It all depends how that cask has matured, how the whiskey exemplifies itself on its own. As part of the Fine and Rare collection as well, we did have a special edition release of the 1926 Fine and Rare. From the single cask, there were just 40 bottles. 12 bore labelling designed by Sir Peter Blake, like on the left here. 12 were designed by Italian artist Adami, such as on the right. One bottle was hand painted, and the remainder had the standard fine and rare style labelling to them. Now in 1987, one of these bottles sold at auction for £5,000. That set the world record as the most expensive bottle of wine and spirit in the world. Late 80s, £5,000 would easily have put down a very large deposit on a house here in Speyside. Since then, these bottles have gone on to break their own record a few times. Most recently in 2019, a bottle with the fine and rare style labelling sold for £1.4 million. Incredibly valuable bottle indeed. We do know of at least one bottle which has been consumed, probably before it reached that £1.4 million price mark. But we also know of one which was lost in earthquakes in Japan. A big whiskey collector lost not only the 1926 fine and rare, but many other rare and valuable bottles. So really sad day for the whiskey community as a whole. And recently in a castle local to here, Brodie Castle, they found one of the glass cases which the bottle was displayed in, but no bottle. So we can assume that one was probably consumed as well, but we don't know the exactly what happened to that bottle. Could have been consumed, could have just gone missing at some point, who knows. It might pop up again in many years' time. If we head further down, the final section of the wall here is dedicated to our collaborations. So here at the Macallan, we are always working with different companies and individuals to inspire our whiskies. So, of course, we know we are creating excellent quality whiskies all the time. However, it helps to have an idea behind what you are creating. When you're marrying your casks together, you need to have an idea. You can't just randomly throw casks in a vat and hope that something good's going to come out. The whiskey making team like to have a bit of inspiration though, so they can choose what they're going to be creating. Now the edition series here, these brightly coloured bottles, is a great example of that, because every single edition in the series was created in collaboration with a different group to represent a special aspect of the Macallan whisky. Our first one was created with the Coopers out in Jerez, who craft every single one of our casks. Absolutely essential to us. Without them, we simply do not have the Macallan whisky at all. The second edition was made with the Roca brothers, a trio of chefs who own El Cellar de Can Roca. It's 2 years running the best restaurant in the world, with 3 Michelin stars. So if anybody knows how to get me in there, then please do so, because I love a bit of grub meat. The third edition was created with the French perfumer Rouge à Dove. Now this is to represent those unique aromas of the Macallan whisky. The fourth edition was actually crafted in collaboration with the architects of our new distillery building here, Roger Stirk Harbour and Partners. And this is very much centred around the craftsmanship of our spirit. The fifth edition is, in my opinion, the coolest of the series, because we worked with the colour company Pantone. And this is to represent the 100% natural colours of the Macallan whiskies. But as part of the collaboration as well, Pantone did something for us. They crafted for us this unique purple. This shade is called the Macallan Purple and is exclusively for us to use. We have exclusive rights to that colour. The sixth and final edition in the series is a bit of a trio of collaborations though. It was crafted with our Gilly of the estate, Robert Mitchell, so he looks after our section of the river. House of Hardy Fishing Gear, who produce the finest quality fishing rods you can buy. And that's the kind of rod that we use on the estate here as well when we're fishing. And most importantly of all though, it was crafted in collaboration with the Atlantic Salmon Trust. Now the Atlantic Salmon Trust is a charity who work not only to improve the River Spey's ecosystem, but many other river systems throughout the world, to essentially help improve the lives of salmon. Salmon populations across the globe have been in decline over recent years, and so they're working proactively to try and increase those populations. Just last week, our Gilly Robert was, not last week, sorry, the week before, I'm on to a new week now. So a couple of weeks ago, our Gilly Robert was working with them and released juvenile salmon into a tributary of the Spey. So they'll go out and live their lives and then come back up the river again to spawn. So we are very proactive in that. Additionally, every single bottle of edition 6 that was sold, a percentage went directly to the charity to help in their efforts. We do frequently work with the same collaborators again and again though. For example, the Roca brothers we've also worked with on the Distillery World Series, London and New York. They are masters of taste, so they have a heavy influence in the casks that are selected. The whiskey makers love working with them because they have unique perspectives on the flavours of the whiskey. The Distillery World Series, the London for example, what they're trying to do with this series is distill the essence of a city into a single bottle. So with the London, the tasting notes, you would get things like, if you think like a Camden spice market, so you've got all your cardamom and cinnamon, ginger. But also, Earl Grey tea, because the English love a good cup of tea. The Distillery World New York, however, they went for a much more sweeter profile. So the Big Apple, so if you think about an apple pie and some very sweet flavour notes in that one as well. And that's what they were trying to do, is distill the essence of that city into one bottle. If we head a little bit further down again, you can see we have some more of our collaborations here. So again, Sir Peter Blake we've worked with many a time. He's a collagist, sorry. And so we've worked with him. This is our Anecdotes of Ages series. So he created all of these bottles, the label designs. The one on the left is the bottle which was actually sold. But all the other bottles are unique. These are one-offs, not to be sold, just specially for our collection. So the two down the end here are quite important. So on the second one in, we have our Gilly Robert on there. And you'll notice on his shoulder there's a small red squirrel. Now this is what had to be put on to see, a bit of placing it on his shoulder. It wasn't actually a squirrel in the photograph. But this is to represent Malcolm. Now Malcolm is a squirrel that lives down by the river, and Robert feeds him probably about half his wages in nuts. So Malcolm's an excellent mascot for our estate, and he features on quite a few bottles. And additionally, the final bottle there has some of our Whisky Mastery team on it, including right at the front and middle, we have Kirstine Campbell, who is our master whiskey maker. She's our first ever female master whiskey maker. She's absolutely fantastic at what she does. So before we head upstairs, I'd just like to show you one final bottle. So in the pillar in the center there again. Now this is the Macallan The Reach. It's the oldest ever expression of the Macallan, aged 81 years. This spirit was distilled and the cask filled in the year 1940. And then it was bottled in 2021. As part of this, we also worked with an Edinburgh-based artist called Saskia Robinson, who created this sculpture of the three hands here. Now the three hands are to represent three key people in the creation of this whiskey. One hand being to represent the distillery workers from the 1940s who crafted the spirit, but then had to go off to fight in the war, but they made sure there was something for us to come back to. The second hand is of Alan Sheath. As I mentioned, he is the gentleman who grew the Macallan to being the global brand it is today. And the third hand at the back is that of Kirstine Campbell, our master whiskey maker, who selected the cask to be used. The bottle is also housed inside this wooden case, and this is crafted from an elm tree which fell on the estate. Now we lost the elm tree in a storm, so it naturally fell, and we decided to use the wood to create this case. We believe that that tree would have been growing in the year 1940, based on the size of it. And it's very much a piece of history, this whiskey. That's how Kirstine Campbell herself describes it, as a sip of history every time. I can honestly tell you I've not tried it. Bit out of my price range, but it's definitely an absolutely gorgeous one. So what we'll do is we'll head upstairs now and go into the production area to learn a little bit more about how the spirit itself is crafted for building these fantastic structures. The roof is made up of 380,000 individual pieces of Scandinavian pine. Now these all fit together like a jigsaw to make the roof completely self-supporting. The steel beams we have were in place for the construction process, and the intention was that they would be removed. However, they liked the aesthetics when they finished, and so they left them in. But they bear no weight. If they weren't there, the roof would be in the exact same position it is now. And just to our side as well, we have our salmon school sculpture.
연어구나.
아, 그러게.
This is a temporary edition. It's actually going to be leaving us in the next couple of weeks. Designed by American artist Joseph Rosano. This is to represent the salmon in the River Spey. He's a very passionate fisher and is very concerned personally about the plight of the salmon. So he worked to design this particular sculpture here. So each of the fish in the sculpture is crafted from hand-blown mirrored glass. Glass was deliberately chosen to represent the fragility of the ecosystem, and the mirrored effect is to allow you to reflect on yourself and what we all need to do to help that ecosystem. This was first unveiled at COP26 conference in Glasgow. And so this actually originally hung over the dignitaries' dining table. So in the evenings when they were having their lovely dinners and things, they had this to remind them what they were there for. You know, all the most powerful people who can make all our decisions for our environment had this to remind them to reflect on what they needed to do, why they were there. So in a couple of weeks this will be moving on. It's going to be going down. Yeah.
와.
냄새나.
따뜻해. 약간 사우나 들어온 것 같아.
그러네.
와우.
말 잘 들어야지.
Welcome to the Macallan Distillery. This is where all of our spirit is crafted. However, this only started in 2018. Prior to this, our old distillery building was over the road from us. And every Macallan whiskey you may have had in the past, and everyone will have today, would have been crafted in that old facility, because all of our spirit from this distillery is still too young for us to use in our whiskies. So the old facility could make up to 10 million litres of spirit per year. This new one increased capacity by 50%, so we could make up to 15 million litres of spirit per year. Now if we head down, we actually see some more of the structure, and we'll head right down to the end to the other end. So we have here a bird's eye model of the distillery building itself, and it's split up into 4 what we call pods. Our first pod down this end holds our mill and our mash tun, and this serves the whole distillery. The subsequent 3 pods are all identical to one another, each one having 7 stainless steel washbacks around the outside and 12 copper stills in the center. 4 of which will be your large wash still, which each feeds into 2 smaller spirit stills, giving 8 of those total per pod. Now to create our spirit, we actually need 3 raw ingredients. We need malted barley, yeast, and water. Now, all of our water for production comes from 4 boreholes along the River Spey. So not from the river itself, but from deep underground. We do take a small amount of water directly from the Spey, but this is only used for cooling vessels, after which it will be taken to our effluent plant to be cleaned and then released back into the river as pure clean water. All of the yeast we use is a liquid cream form of yeast called Maori NG+, and this naturally gives you very fruity flavours in the spirit produced. And all of our barley is malted for us by Simpson's Malting, which is based in Berwick-on-Tweed near Edinburgh. So once the barley has been harvested, it'll be transported there. They'll malt it for us, and they'll transport it all up to us here. First, it will go into our mill, where it's ground into a floury substance called grist. And then this will go into our mash tun, 17 tons per mash. This will end up this will break down the starches in the grist into sugars to give us a sugary liquid called wort, which is then transported into our washbacks. It's in here that the yeast is added to produce the alcohol we're looking for. However, at this point it's not very strong, and so we need to distill it not once but twice. First in our larger wash still, and then our smaller spirit stills. And it's from the small spirit stills that we take our spirit from for our new make spirit, which is filled into every single cask of the Macallan. That's quite a brief overview of the production process. I'll go into a bit more detail as we head round some of the vessels, but do you have any questions just now? Fantastic. So we'll head round then. Here we are at our barley table with a representation of the barley we grow. So on our estate, we have 100 acres set aside for growing our own barley. Now we grow our own special variety that's called Momentum. Nobody else is allowed to grow Momentum barley. We have exclusive rights to that particular strain. 100 acres though isn't actually very much. It's about 5 to 7 days worth of production here. And so we work with partner farms throughout the whole of Scotland and the north of England to produce different varieties for us. Now at the moment they're growing Laureate and Diablo barley. Once the barley has been harvested, it will all be transported to Berwick-on-Tweed to Simpson's Maltings. Now what we want to do is we want to access and activate the starches within the barley grains. There's a very hard, husky shell to every barley grain, and so the easiest way is to trick them into germinating, into thinking that it's springtime, so it's time to grow. We do this by steeping the grains in warm water for a few days, and this will saturate the cell walls to activate those starches, and will make the barley think that it's time to grow, and so the germination process will be activated. However, we don't want a full plant to grow. We need to halt that very quickly. So we lay out the barley on a malting floor and blow dry it with hot air. Much like as if you were to go to the hairdresser and have a blow dry, same idea. We're not drying your hair though, we're stopping the germination of the barley. But to ensure that the process is finished off completely, we then fire the barley under a coal-fired kiln. This gives us our malted barley, which is transported up to us here. And it first goes into our mill, which is that small vessel in the middle at the end there. This is a 6-roll Mueller mill. And this will grind the barley grain into a floury substance called grist. It's a real mixture of flour and husks, and it's incredibly gritty as well. 17 tons of grist then goes into our mash tun per mash. In here, water will be added 4 times, each time at a higher temperature than the last. The first water is around 64 degrees Celsius, and the final water is around 92 degrees Celsius. This will activate different enzymes, primarily alpha and beta amylase, to break down the starches into sugars, primarily maltose, and give us that sugary liquid that's called wort. There is a second product from the mash tun though. This is all our spent barley husks, and we call this the draff. Now draff is traditionally converted into animal feed and fed to animals on the estate. However, our draff today is not used for that purpose. Ours is sent to the local biomass plant, where it's mixed with wood chips and burned to create steam energy, which will turn turbines and produce electricity, which we use to power the distillery building here. So around 97% of all energy on the estate is from the renewable sources. Now if we head over to the mash tun, we can see what stage it's at. Make a bit of a... So you see, some of the water has been added. I think it's just stopped, ready to add the next water. And you see those big metal forks will spin around to mix everything together to ensure all the starch is broken down into the sugars. Now the mashing process is incredibly quick. It only takes about 3.5 hours for a mash. Then about an hour and a half to clean, so 5 hours for a full cycle. So we can mash 3 or 4 times a day. But you might notice we've got some big gaps behind us. This is so in the future, once we mash all red Macallan space ready for another mash for the mill, the acidity is not only getting older, but also creating more space for the still. See those rolling hills in Speyside, which inspired the architect of this kind of building? They want us to be a part of the environment. Why we have one living room? We get a lot of wildlife here on the estate. There's over 70 species of bird and mammal. So once we have our sugary liquid wort, it will be transported into our washbacks here, which are stainless steel. Now we chose to have stainless steel washbacks instead of the traditional wooden ones because these are much easier to keep clean and additionally will last a lot longer. A wooden washback needs replaced every 15 to 20 years, whereas these should easily last us well over 50 years. So it's a much more sustainable product. So in here the wort will be added and yeast will be added to that as well. So the yeast will digest all of the sugars in the wort to produce carbon dioxide, heat, and most importantly, alcohol. So this gives us a strong, flat beer called the Wash. Has anyone ever tried that before? No? I wouldn't recommend it. It tastes horrible. It's about 11.5% alcohol. It's flat. It's not a nice lager or an IPA or anything. I wouldn't recommend it at all. But that's not strong enough, 11.5%, not for our spirit. And so we need to distill it to make it much stronger. First, it will be fed into our large wash still. So in here, the wash will be boiled. The vapors will rise up the neck of the still, over the swan neck at the top, and down the line arm to the condenser. Now this leaves us a spirit that's called low wines. And that's around 22 to 24% alcohol. Still not strong enough. And so we have the second distillation in the smaller spirit still. So in here, the same process takes place, but we get a much stronger alcohol out at the end. Now if we head over to the next table, we can actually see a couple of models of some stills. So we have models of two stills here, one being the curiously small stills of the Macallan, and the other something you might more typically find in a different distillery in Speyside. Inside, the same basic process takes place, but we can actually open them up and show you that.
오. 오.
So you can see the lights representing the liquid boiling in the bottom of the still. And the vapors will start to rise up the neck of the still. Now in this really big tall still, the thick, heavy, oily alcohol vapors don't have enough energy to reach all the way to the top. So they will drop back down in a process that's called reflux. And that's what these stills are designed to do. And so the vapor will reboil in that bubble in the middle and will rise up again and give a much lighter texture of spirit. But that's not what we're known for here at Macallan. We're known for that viscous, full-bodied, mouth-coating spirit. And we get this from the curiously small stills. Because there's such a short journey from the base to the top of the still, those heavy, oily alcohol vapors can make it all the way over the swan neck to the top and down the line arms of the condenser. And that's what gives us that viscous characteristic of the spirit. Now there's no one type of spirit that's better than the other. The other distillery is simply looking for a different texture to their spirit. And we're looking for something else entirely as well. They're just looking for something different in the end. It's like comparing apples and pears. You might prefer one to the other, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the better option. So the bubble, so that's where the vapors will reboil in the bubble. So the heavy vapors will rise up and then drop back down to that bubble where they'll reboil again, and so you get a lighter texture to the spirit. Now every distillery, when we're taking spirit from our stills, is looking for what's called the heart of the run. Anything above the heart is too strong, and anything below the heart is too weak. Now if we head down to the final table, we can have a see a representation of the heart. These are spirit that come out of the still. The first spirit that comes out is called the foreshots, or the heads, as represented by these crackled pillars. Now these actually contain not only ethanol, but methanol, which is incredibly poisonous, which is why we cannot use that for our spirit. The second set of pillars is to represent the tails or the fins. Now this is anything weaker than the heart, and so it hasn't actually been fully purified, it's very cloudy. The pillars in the middle though are to represent the heart of the spirit. Now at the Macallan, we have an incredibly small margin which is considered to be the heart, and so we call this the finest cut. We only take spirit between alcohol percentages 72 and 68% by volume. Anything above the 72% is too strong, that's the foreshots. Anything below the 68% is too weak, and that's the famous. The small pillars here at the end though are to represent the spirit which is less than 1% alcohol by volume. This is called hot ale, and this will actually be sent to our effluent plant to be treated, where it is then released back into the river as pure, clean water. So once we have our alcohol, our finest cut between 72 and 68%, it is watered down to 63.5% to ensure consistency of the spirit. And this is our new make spirit. This is the DNA of the Macallan that's filled into every single one of our casks. So whether that is a sherry oak 12-year-old or something as old as the reach at 81 years old, it began as this same spirit. Now have a sample of which you can try. So if you'd like to take a glass. So you'll notice it is a completely clear liquid because it is so incredibly pure. And if you give it a wee swirl around the glass, you can see that viscosity of the spirit clinging to the side, the legs of it. that's that viscous character clinging to the side of the glass. Now on the nose of this is actually incredibly fruity. You can also pick up on some of the cereal notes from the bottle as well. Now everyone will pick up on slightly different aromas if you would like to aroma with whiskey. Anything else? Or?
무슨 향 나는지 맞춰보래.
People tend to get like the pear is quite common one, banana peel maybe. I personally get like forest berries, so like blackberries and raspberries and things. So we'll all pick up on slightly different things. And if you'd like to have any taste,
왔어?
아니다.
then despite the high strength, that is incredibly smooth.
먹었어?
아니?
여기 목이 타.
So locally, we would call back in the 1400s what people would have drank. They wouldn't take the time to water down and age their spirits. They would drink it like this.
맛은 어때?
Also, probably because they didn't have the technology to measure spirit and alcohol percentage, they would have had a lot more of that forethought, the edge which is really that
실험실에 있는 거 맛있는 거.
and they would be drinking this all day, every day. And eventually, it would actually lead for them to go blind. And that's where the term blind drunk comes from.
아, 위스키에서 향 뺀 그 전 단계.
위스키 담기 전. 아, 통에 담기 전.
딱 그 맛이야.
그래?
향이 그 우드 향이 하나도 안 나.
아쉽다.
그냥 이제 시원한 데로 간다.
더운 거 끝났다.
저 물 맞고 싶다.
And we have the real size version just down the hill from us. This is the spiritual home of Macallan, built in the year 1700 by Captain John Grant. And to this very day, we have the marriage stone for him and his wife Elizabeth on the front of the building at the top here. So marriage stones were a very common practice back in the 1700s. And before that, you would build a lovely family home, you'd put a marriage stone on there so everybody knew that you built it. It's probably mid to late 1800s, and just through people moving around a lot more, we didn't stay in the same buildings our entire lives. Now we only took ownership of the house in the 1960s, after which it had gone through a little bit of disrepair. There had been a fire which had damaged a lot of the building. And so we completely renovated it and opened it in the 1980s as our first ever visitor centre here on the estate. Since then it's gone through a couple more renovations, and we now use it to house some guests on the estate. So if we have any important visitors staying, they'll get to stay in the house. Such our CEO will stay in the house if he's up visiting, or managing director, or any of our important business clients as well may stay in the house. However, we'd like to show you what the house might have looked like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, so the time of Roderick Kemp, the father of the modern Macallan. He did live in the house for a short period of time before he decided to move back to his own home in Belgium, where he was from.
왠지 이건 내려갈 것 같아.
그래?
So the house today does follow quite a similar layout,
예쁘다.
with the bedrooms on the top floor, the dining room on the middle floor, and where they have their piano room, we've got a lounge instead. And the big difference we have made really is move the kitchen into the middle floor as well. It's a lot easier when you're serving dinner if you're on the same floor, the kitchen and dining room. And so the kitchen they have downstairs, we now have a utility area and a cloakroom. And where they have their library, we have a gorgeous music room. It's absolutely wonderful. But if we have a look on the back wall of the dining room here, we have a small portrait of Roderick Kemp himself. So he's the father of the modern Macallan. And the adjoining room, a portrait on the wall of Janet Harbinson, the lady that the Spirit of 1926 short film is about. And this table in front of her holds the world's smallest bottle of the Macallan, which is real Macallan whiskey in that bottle.
really?
I can show you incredibly bigger. So Israel's house sits at the heart of the Macallan Estate,
요거.
485 acres in size. 100 acres of that is set aside for growing our own barley, that momentum barley. We have 1.75 miles of fishing rights on the River Spey. And our Gilly Robert does take guests out fishing, have a great day out, try to catch some fish, have a few drams, just nice, relaxed day. Very private as well. They'll only take up to 4 guests at a time. We also have our own small herd of Highland cattle. See them just opposite the guest car park there. They're an absolute favourite of most visitors and the staff as well. We do love them. They're quite friendly, but I wouldn't recommend going in the field with them. They can turn in an instant if you're in their field. But if up at the fence, they're not bothered about you being right there. Great fun. But additionally, on our estate, we have over 400,000 casks of our spirit, maturing away, waiting to become one of our bottled whiskies. Now, if we head right down the end again, I can show you a little bit more about the exceptional oak casks at Macallan.
저 벽이 위까지 올라왔네. 쭉.
So if you'd like to head over towards the back window first of all.
Thank you.
So I brought you over to this back window first of all for an incredibly important reason, and it's one of my favourite views. That's simply it. I just love the view. So in the background we have a mountain which is called Ben Rinnes. This is the largest mountain in the area. Now in Scotland our largest classification of mountains are called Munros. Ben Rinnes doesn't make the cut, it's not tall enough. However, it falls into a unique kind of classification which has been dubbed a Macallan because it is a prominent peak with no other peaks nearby. It's quite a nice walk up to the top. It's a path all the way, so it's nice and easy. And from the top, you can see distilleries all around you. They're absolutely, it's just a spectacular thing to do. Especially on a clear day. It's a little bit cloudy today, but on a clear day, it's just one of the best views around. Now, a little bit closer to home, though, you can see some of our traditional dunnage warehouses. Now, these have thick stone walls and dirt floors with a slated roof. This naturally regulates the temperature and humidity of the warehouse to ensure that the casks have the optimum conditions with which to mature. Even closer still, we have this smaller building here, which has been painted white. Now this is our gardener's cottage. Originally, these cottages would have been right the way around a courtyard in the centre there, and these would have housed distillery workers in the past. This is the last one standing, and prior to 2018, this was our visitor centre. It now houses some of our whisky mastery team, so they could be in there creating the next expressions of the Macallan, sat with their samples from all the very many different casks and selecting them to create the next expression. They might be in there, they might be on one of the, we have a second building for them as well. So if we head round the front into this wooden panelled area, I can show you more about the casks themselves and how they are crafted. So if you'd like to stand opposite me and then face towards me, yeah. And then you should all be able to see everything that goes on. So here in the Macallan, every single one of our casks is crafted from either American oak or European oak wood. There's an important reason for this. It's partly to do with how porous the wood is, but also Scotch whisky legislation dictates it must be oak that our whiskies are matured in. Now you may start to see a couple of saplings starting to appear. And these are starting to grow into what could one day become a cask of the Macallan. And we'll be working with the forestry commissions throughout the lives of these trees. To your left, we have our European oak tree. These are a very squat tree with a very thick trunk and lots of low-hanging branches. Now, European oaks have quite a dark colour of wood to them. And whiskies matured in European oak casks tend to give us what I call the winter flavours, So you get likes of your dried fruits and spices. To your right, we have our American oak tree. These are much taller and thinner and grow in dense forests. There is also a lighter colour of wood to the American oak tree, and so whiskies matured in American oak casks tend to give us what I call the summer flavours. So you'll get likes of your citrus fruits, sweet vanillas, and maybe even a bit of tropical fruit from time to time as well. It takes an incredibly long time for these trees to mature. The American oak are grown in the eastern states of the United States of America for between 70 and 90 years. The European oak are grown in forests in the north of Spain and a little bit of the south of France. And these can take over 120 years to fully mature. Now we work very closely with the forestry commissions in Europe and in America to ensure that not only are we selecting the trees for the best quality wood, but also to allow the forests to naturally regenerate. So much so that since our records began in the 90s, every forest we source our trees from has grown in size significantly. Because every time we cut down one of these big trees, we're letting down a lot of light to the forest floor. Additionally, we don't fell sections of forest. We individually choose every single tree. Now when it is time for them to be felled, they will first be left to air dry in the forest for around 18 months. We insist on naturally air drying as this preserves the characteristics of the wood. We could speed up the process, but we would alter the characteristics of the wood in that process, and that's not what we want to do. We will then cut the trees into quarters and leave them to air dry for a further 6 months before they're cut into staves like you might see on these panels behind me. And then they're shipped off to Jerez in Spain, where all of our casks are crafted at the cooperages there. So if you'd like to turn around and face in towards the cask in the middle, we have a short video to show you to demonstrate the passion and craftsmanship of our coopers out in Jerez. It's a stark contrast to the completely automated modern facility for production of our spirits. This is Tabasa Cooperage that primarily deals with our European oak trees.
오, 불 나와. 오. 튀게 만들려고 안에 하는 거 아니야? 모르겠네.
So you can see it's really absolute art form. Lots of manual craftsmanship involved in every single one of our casks. They're all handmade out in Jerez. If we head round the back now, so we have some long slices here representing the different kinds of wood that we use. The American oak on the left and the European on the right. We have here 3 of our casks. So once our casks have been crafted, they will all be seasoned with Oloroso sherry at the bodegas in Jerez. Now, our casks have to be created out in Jerez for a very simple reason, that champagne has to come from the Champagne region of France. Scotch whisky from Scotland, sherry has to come from the Sherry Triangle in Spain. We choose Oloroso sherry because it is an oxidized, has an oxidized aging process, and which gives it those deep, rich flavors and the dark, tawny color of the sherry, which will penetrate deep into the wood. It takes around 18 months to season a cask, after which the sherry will be emptied out. It can then be used to season future casks if we simply mix it with a little bit of fresh sherry as well. If it, however, we've decided it's now no longer of use to us for seasoning casks, it can be sold to cooking companies who will convert it into sherry wine vinegar. None of the sherry which seasons our casks is used for drinking sherry. Now recently we've taken over 50% ownership of Grupo Estevez. Now they own the Valdespino brand of sherry, and so they make ultra premium drinking sherries and have never before used sherry for seasoning casks. But they're going to be doing that for the first time ever, exclusively for the Macallan. Now we can assure everyone though that every single one of our existing partnerships with the other bodegas out in Jerez is ongoing. This is simply another way for us to expand our cask sourcing production and to ensure that cask supply, to secure it for us. Because the casks, without them, we simply don't have the Macallan. Around 80% of the characteristics of the whiskey comes from the cask. The other 20% from that new make spirit that we tried earlier. We have 3 different cask sizes. 2 of them each hold 500 litres of spirit at a time. We have the butt and the puncheon. Now the butt is the industry standard, nice and reliable. Whereas the puncheon, because it's shorter with a big fat belly on it, there's more staves around the outside, and so you tend to get more intense characteristics of the whiskey matured. However, it's a little bit more random how they're going to turn out. But our favourites on the estate are these small ones here. These are called hogsheads, and they just hold 250 litres of spirit. And these, again, there's more contact of the wood with the spirit, so you get the most intense characteristics of whiskey maturing in a hogshead cask. Now we keep track of everything at the Macallan. We have teams working with the forestry commissions. We have teams working with the coopers, teams working with the bodegas, and we have teams working through that entire supply chain for the sourcing of our casks. And we can track it all. Every cask, once it has been crafted, will be affixed with a yellow barcode, like on this one here. The other 2 have lost theirs in their years on display. But they will all originally have one of these yellow barcodes. Now this is the Edrington cask tracking system. And this will tell us the full history of the cask, all the way back to the tree that was felled. So we have full knowledge from acorn to glass of the history of your whiskey. Similarly, once the cask has been filled with new make spirit, there will be a second barcode attached, which is white. And this will tell us the history of the spirit, all the way back to the barley farm from which the grains were sourced. So from grain to glass, we have full knowledge of your whiskey. Nobody else invests as much time into the sourcing of their raw materials and their casks as Macallan does. Because without them, we simply wouldn't have our whiskey. They're essential to us. We have a lot of passion in their quality. Now, once we have used a cask and we've matured our whiskey in the cask and emptied it out for bottling, we can then use that cask again a second time. We need to be inspected to see if it requires any repairs by our on-site coopers. So they don't craft any casks, but they will repair the ones we have. And then it can be used a second time. After that second use, we will not use it a third time. The casks are really well made, they're fantastically good quality, so they can still be used, but we choose not to use them here at the Macallan because we are known for that intensity of the flavours and aromas of our whiskey. And if you think about it like making a cup of tea, if you use the same tea bag time after time, you're going to get a weaker brew each time. We don't want to compromise on the intensity of the characteristics of our whiskey. So we'll sell them on, and other distilleries might use them because they still have a great life left in them, just not quite the same intensity of the characteristics. So if we head out to the next table now, we can actually see a little bit more about the coloration of our whiskey.
고프로 켜봐.
Share what casks they've used in the creation of a whiskey, but we can sometimes make assumptions based on the coloration of that bottle and the flavor aromas.
I am the Macallan.
Then leading into more of that vanilla and a bit of dried fruit and spice at the end. Every time these expressions are released, we just know that we're going to open more bottles. So the final dram of our experience here today is the Harmony collection inspired by Intense Arabica. Quite a unique, quite a different dram to the ones downstairs. It's quite a bit darker. You can see it's going to have more of the influence of that European oak. And the Harmony collection is very much centered around sustainability. It's what inspired the idea behind the collection, with each expression having a unique inspiration as well, but all centered around sustainability. So the first releases in the collection were the rich cacao with the global travel retail exclusive fine cacao, so all centered around the chocolate. However, this expression is our more recent one, inspired by Intense Arabica, and the partner to this one was in the global travel retail and the green packaging, which is inspired by Smooth Arabica. So the red of the inspired by Intense Arabica here is to represent the roasted coffee bean, that very intense flavouring, whereas the Smooth Arabica should be a little bit smooth, a little bit lighter on the notes, because it's to represent the green of the coffee fruit itself. So on the nose of this one, we can actually pick up on some of those coffee notes. Our whiskey maker Stephen Bremner went out to Ethiopia, the birthplace of coffee, to learn more about the process of creating coffee and more about that in the whole industry as a product. So on the nose, you can pick up on some of those very lovely creamy coffee aromas, such a bit of maybe a cappuccino, a tiramisu, but still with those classic Macallan dried fruits and spices. On the palate though, it transcends to a more intense flavour.
어때요? 커피 향 나?
이게 더 부드러운 것 같은데? 아까 거보다?
15보다? 오.
근데 너무 크게 찍는 거.
Now the packaging of this collection is very much centered around the sustainability as well. So much so that the label here is actually much rougher than most Macallan labels are. This is because it is a unique paper that has been crafted using the coffee bean husks. so this would have been a waste product, but it is now very much been used, worked with a paper company to craft something unique for us. And this the same type of paper was used on the box itself.
이거 되게 부드러워.
향은
So we have your experience packs for the drivers of you here today.
와.
Thank you.
So this will have the tasting notes and everything inside the packaging for you as well. So you can finish off the you can do the experience at home for the double cask range.
뭐